Well, I'm tempted to just ask Jordan a question here. I mean, it's hard to know what to save for tomorrow night, but I feel like we've got 3,000 people sitting here who would really like an answer to this question. You say you believe in God. You have been...
No, I say I act as if he exists.
You say what?
I say I act as if he exists,
okay,
which is a much more precise claim.
Okay, so then what, but in this case, what... So you act as though God exists.
Yep.
And in addition, I've heard you say that I act as though God exists, that I can't really be an atheist.
So far it seems that.
Right, yeah.
We'll see.
The night is young.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm not really an atheist. I've heard you say this. So that
well, some of you is.
Well, if I were really an atheist, I would be far more poorly behaved than in fact I am. Right? I would be like Raskolnikov committing murders and assuming there was nothing wrong with it.
It would be more likely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
wait, that's a big distinction.
I need to know.
Be more likely.
What was that?
It's a big distinction. That you would is very different than it would be more likely. Taking the safety off the gun is not the same thing as shooting it, right?
Yeah.
The temptations laid open to Raskolnikov would be more at hand.
Okay.
Just as they were to him.
So, in what sense do you mean? What is the God that you act as though he, she, it exists? And what is the God-shaped thing I must have in my life to prevent me from being a, quote, real atheist?
Well, okay, first of all, I have to point out that there's no possible way I can answer both those questions in 2 minutes.
Well, it's the same question. I mean,
yeah,
what do you mean by God?
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I mean by God. Okay?
We do have to get to questions.
Maybe we're going to do this tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe this is where we start. Oh, God. Well, that was a pretty resounding no.
It seems like that constitutes an audience question, wouldn't you say?
All right, I tell you what. Let's... Let's do this, but let's be deliberate about time.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read some things that I wrote because it's so complicated that I'm not sure that I can just spin it off the top of my head, and so you'll have to excuse me. So, and what I'm going to do is sort of paint a picture by highlighting different things. So now I already made one point here. I made the point that part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos is the notion that whatever God is expressed in the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. And that isn't all it does. It also confronts the chaos of being itself and generates habitable order. That's the metaphysical proposition. And that's best conceptualized as at least one element of God. And so I would think about it as a transcendent reality that's only observable across the longest of time frames, the longest of iterated time frames, to your point. So here's some propositions, and they're complicated, and they need to be unpacked. So I'm just going to read them, and that'll have to do for the time being. So God is how we imaginatively and collectively represent the existence and action of consciousness across time, as the most real aspects of existence manifest themselves across the longest of time frames, but are not necessarily apprehensible as objects in the here and now. So what that means in some sense is that you have conceptions of reality built into your biological and metaphysical structure that are a consequence of processes of evolution that occurred over unbelievably vast expanses of time, and that structure your perception of reality in ways that it wouldn't be structured if you only lived for the amount of time that you're going to live. And that's also part of the problem of deriving values from facts, because you're evanescent and you can't derive the right values from the facts that portray themselves to you in your lifespan, which is why you have a biological structure that's like 3.5 billion years old. So God is that which eternally dies and is reborn in the pursuit of higher being and truth. That's a fundamental element of hero mythology. God is the highest value in the hierarchy of values. That's another way of looking at it. God is what calls and what responds in the eternal call to adventure. God is the voice of conscience. God is the source of judgment and mercy and guilt. God is the future to which we make sacrifices. Here's a cool one if you're an evolutionary biologist. God is that which selects among men in the eternal hierarchy of men. So, men arrange themselves into hierarchies, and then men rise in the hierarchy. And there's principles that are important that determine the probability of their rise, and those principles aren't tyrannical power. They're something like the ability to articulate truth and the ability to be competent and the ability to make appropriate moral judgments. And if you can do that in a given situation, then all the other men will vote you up the hierarchy, so to speak, and that will radically increase your reproductive fitness. And the operation of that process across long expanses of time looks to me like it's codified in something like the notion of God the Father. It's also the same thing that makes men attractive to women, because women peel off the top of the male hierarchy, and the question is, what should be at the top of the hierarchy? And the answer right now is tyranny as part of the patriarchy, but the real answer is something more like the ability to use truthful speech in the service of, let's say, well-being. And so that's something that operates across tremendous expanses of time, and it plays a role in the selection for survival itself, which makes it a fundamental reality.
Jordan, if I can I just cut in here with one question?
I'll stop with that for now.
What? So I was not hearing in that list of attributes a God who could care if anyone masturbated. I was not hearing a God who...
Depends on what else is stopping you from doing, Sam.
Sorry, I missed that.
I said it depends on what else it's stopping you from doing.
Well, yeah, okay. So it's
yeah,
important to live.
But seriously.
It's important to do something other than masturbate.
Yes. Yes, which actually constitutes a problem for many people.
Which is harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing a God, a personal God who can possibly hear anyone's prayers, much less answer them, right? And so I'm wondering what percentage of religious people who would say, "Oh yeah, I believe in God and it's the most important thing in my life." What percentage of those religious people do you think have in mind a God of the sort you just described?
I don't know, Sam. It's a good question, because when I go talk to people, when I talk to people online and use exactly this terminology, millions of people listen. So it's not so obvious what percentage of people see it this way. It may be that they have the intuitions, but they haven't been articulated well.
I mean, this is the problem. This is what worries me about this. So, you could do the same thing with the idea of ghosts, right? So people traditionally have believed in ghosts. It's an archetype, you might say, the ghost. Survival of death is certainly an archetype. And we know what most people most of the time mean when they say they believe in ghosts. And I say, I don't believe in ghosts. And you say, no, you do believe in ghosts. Ghosts are your relationship to the unseen. That's a ghost. So you have a new definition of ghost that you're putting in the place provided, which I have to say, well, of course I have a relationship to the unseen, so yeah, I guess I do believe in ghosts. You win that argument. But that simply isn't what most people mean by a ghost. But this is what I hear you doing with God. You have defined the God that most people believe in, and we know this is the God that most people believe in.
I was asked what God I believed in.
I'm asking you what percentage. Yes, but you by shifting the definition, you have robbed the noun, the traditional noun, of its traditional meaning, and you're imparting to people.
Wait a second.
I'm not so sure.
What do you mean by traditional meaning? Look, it's one of the elemental claims in the Old Testament is that you're not even supposed to utter the name of God, because by defining it too tightly, you lose its essence. And so let's not be talking about what the classical definition of God is here, okay? It's a historical non-starter. Okay, and there's plenty of religions that
Can I check in with the audience? Is the audience all right with us continuing down this road?
No. Okay.
So can I jump in here?
You're sacrificing your Q&A.
So yeah, that it is at the expense of Q&A. Yeah. That's what you're giving up. Yeah. But I think it's probably worth it. So let me say, Sam, I do not believe in a supernatural God. But the God that I heard Jordan just describe, I do not have any difficulty understanding why he might care if you masturbate, and I also don't have any trouble figuring out how he might answer prayers.
Well, tell me more then.
Well, I can tell you how a prayer might be answered.
Okay.
And you might like this, you maybe not, but well, it's possible. Okay, so imagine that. Okay, so let's imagine that hellish situation that you laid out. Okay, but let's put the extra twist in it. So let's say the hell that we're talking about isn't the victim of the terrible massacres that you laid out in the jungle story, but a perpetrator. Okay, so someone who's actually acted in a malevolent manner, truly malevolent manner. Okay, or maybe perhaps we wouldn't have to take that extreme case. We could say, well, perhaps you've decided that you've decided that you've seriously done something wrong. Okay, and that you want to get away from hell. You want to make things better. Okay, so here's an exercise you can try. So what you do is you sit on the edge of your bed and you say, okay, what I did was wrong. And you have to really believe this, right? So you've thought about it. It's killing you. It's killing you. So now you're penitent and you're confessing, let's say. And you're confessing to yourself as much as to anyone. And you say, I really want to know what I did wrong. And I really want to know what I could do to put it right. And I'm willing to accept any answer that will manifest itself to me. You try that. See what happens.
Well,
that's a prayer that will be answered, and it won't be answered in the way that you want it to be answered. I can bloody well tell you that.
Okay, but that...
Well, what are you communicating with when you do that?
No, that is something that is a process that I'm familiar with. It doesn't require any supernatural explanation, and it certainly doesn't require that we imagine that any of our books were dictated by the creator of the universe.
I didn't say that it required any supernatural explanation or that it required the book. I was asked to provide an instance of prayer that worked, and that's what I did. I didn't do anything other than that.
That's fully understandable in terms of human psychology. And
it's not understandable because we don't know where the answer comes from.
Well, we don't know where anything comes from.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, but that doesn't open the door. I mean, one thing we can know with absolute certainty is that whoever wrote the Bible didn't know either, and there's many other things he or she didn't know, like everything else we know scientifically, right?
It's not so obvious what people know and what they don't know.
No one even knew the brain was involved in any of this. Right. So
yeah, but they probably knew about as much as we do about how the brain was involved in it.
But we've already established in some tenuous way that things that nobody understands could have evolved into these stories in some way that would be useful, but nobody knew what they were writing when they wrote it. Right.
The problem is that you can. So again, this has been focused through the lens of your attachment to Christianity largely, but Hinduism is a completely different set of stories, right? And many of them, the logic, the emotional logic, the psychological import, many of them have the opposite valence from any Christian story you would tell. The whole notion of, like for instance, the whole notion of good and evil, right, which has such primacy. I mean, you talk about religion being deeper than ethics because ethics just deals with right and wrong, and religion deals with good and evil, right? At bedrock, okay? Good and evil do not have the same meaning in the East. Buddhism and Hinduism do something very different with good and evil.
I'm willing to accept your definitions of good and evil for the current argument.
The truth is, there's just not even evil is just ignorance on some level. It's just evil is just.
You haven't met any real evil people if you believe that.
Well, okay, so then all the Hindus and Buddhists are wrong about this. That's a possible claim. I'm just saying that there's over 1 billion people who have a religious system of stories from which they derive all kinds of meaning, to which they're mightily attached, to where we could play the same game of archetypal interpretation and valuing, and yet the cash value with respect to good and evil is irreconcilable with what you get from Christianity.
But it doesn't have to be interoperable, right?
Well, but The point,
Well, it
my
has to be
point is we
self-consistent.
live in a reality. Presumably, Hinduism is also useful as a set of heuristics
Has to be.
for Hindus. And if Hinduism, as a matter of doctrine, and as a matter of the interpretations of the heuristics by the devout in both systems, if Hinduism and Christianity are irreconcilable, right, then there must be a deeper level of reality that explains why they both work, that can't be reducible to Christianity being true or Hinduism being true. Right.
Yeah, look, Sam, there's absolutely